Hello everyone, welcome to Gagan's virtual classroom. Today we'll take up an interesting topic which is on poetic devices, and we'll learn what these are, and some of the poetic devices will also be explained in this video. But before we begin, let me tell you that if you want to watch the same explanation in Hindi, please click on the link given in the description box below. Okay, so let's get started. First of all, we'll see what a poetic device is. Now, poetic devices are tools that a writer uses to beautify or to enhance the meaning of the text, usually a poem. So, this poetic devices are used by writers, especially in poems, to beautify them or to enhance the meaning, to add more meaning or to add substance to the existing meaning in the text. They use poetic devices. Poetic devices make the text more appealing to the reader's senses. So it is more appealing to our senses when we read the text where these devices have been used. It appeals to us more. For example, if I were to tell you about an incident where two children named Jack and Jill who fell down while fetching water, it may sound uninteresting and monotonous. But if I add rhythm and use rhyming words, it would appeal to our senses. Let's see how. If I tell you, Jack and Jill went up the hill to fetch a pail of water. Jack fell down and broke his crown, and Jill came tumbling after. So you saw how I added rhyming words and some rhythm, and it appealed to our senses more. So I hope now you understood what poetic devices are and why do writers use these in their texts. Okay, now let's look at the first and the most common poetic device that our writers use, which is rhyme. Now, you must have heard this word before, rhyme. When a word or line ends with the same sound as another word or line, it is called rhyme. For example, balloon rhymes with moon. Now, when two words they sound the same, we call that they rhyme. We say that these words rhyme. For example, if you see this poem in The Road Not Taken, the poet writes, "And be one traveler long I stood, and looked down one as far as I could." Now this line ends with stood, and the next line ends with could. And if you see both these words, they sound the same. Stood, could. Right? So these both words, they rhyme. So this is a very common device, very common technique that writers, these poets, they use in their poems. Now let's look at the second rhyming scheme. Now, rhyming scheme is the pattern of sound or rhyme that repeats at the end of a line or stanza. It is usually referred to by using letters of alphabets to indicate which lines rhyme. Lines designated with the same letter rhyme with each other. Now, the writers, they usually follow a pattern. When they use rhyming words in a text, they follow a pattern, like which line should rhyme with which line. And we use alphabets to mark the lines, to give rhyming scheme of a poem. We use letters, we use alphabets. And usually, same alphabets are given to the lines that rhyme with each other. Let's see how. For example, if you see this stanza from the poem The Lake Isle of Innisfree, here, I will arise and go now and go to Innisfree. Here the last word is Innisfree, and we give letter A. Whenever we start thinking about the rhyming scheme, or we have to find out what the rhyming scheme of a stanza or a poem is, we always give A to the first line. Okay, so here the letter A has been designated to this line. Next line, let's see. And a small cabin built there of clay and wattle made. Now here the line ends with the sound made. Now let's see if this rhymes with this word. Innisfree and made. They don't sound the same. So we'll give it the second letter in the alphabets, which is B. Next line, 9 bean rows will I have there, a hive for the honey bee. Now this line ends with honey bee. This word rhymes. It sounds the same as Innisfree, honey bee. And to Innisfree, this line we had given A. So here also we'll use A. Next, and live alone in the bee loud glade. Now glade here rhymes with made. We'd given it B, so this line will also be given B. Now here in this stanza, the rhyming scheme is A, B, A, B. Now let's look at this poem. The stanza has been taken from Macavity the Mystery Cat from class 8's textbook. Macavity, Macavity, there's no one like Macavity, for he is a fiend in feline shape, a monster in depravity. Now if you see, the line here ends with Macavity and this one ends with depravity. These both sound the same. To first line we always give A, and the second one sounds the same as the first line, so here also we'll give A. Now look at the next line. You may meet him in a by street, you may see him in the square, but when a crime's discovered, then Macavity is not there. Now this line ends with the square, this one ends with there. These two also sound the same. We give the second line B, and because the fourth line also sounds the same as the third line, we give B to fourth line as well. So the rhyming scheme of this stanza is A, B, B. So you see, this is the rhyming scheme where the poet or the writer, it follows a particular pattern while using rhyming words. Here the writer must have thought that I'll make first line rhyme with the third line and the second with fourth line. While here the poet thought of using rhyming words where first line and second line rhymed and third and fourth lines, they rhymed with each other. So this is the rhyming scheme. Now the next is blank verse or free verse. Poetry without rhyme is called blank verse or free verse. Now sometimes the poets, they don't use any rhyming words in their poems. That's when we call that the poem is a blank verse or it is a free verse. For example, let's look at this stanza from the Ball poem from class 10's NCERT book. What is the boy now who has lost his ball? Now this line ends with the sound ball and we give it A. Let's look at the next line. What is he to do? I saw it go. Here we've given B since this line does not rhyme. It doesn't sound the same, these two words. So we've given it B. Next, merrily bouncing down the street, and then again there's no rhyme here. So we give it C. Merrily over, there it is in the water. Again, this does not rhyme with any of these words. So we give it the next letter D. So A, B, C, D. If you see, there is no use of rhyming words here. So this we call is a blank verse. Now, why do writers use blank verse? Because blank verse allows the writer to not be constricted by rhyme. They are not forced to use rhyming words. But it's not that it doesn't sound poetic. It still has a sense of pattern because of the use of stressed and unstressed syllables. Okay, now let's have a look at the fourth poetic device, which is simile. Now simile is when two not so similar things are compared to each other using words like as and like. For example, in this line from the Macavity, a Mystery Cat, this poem, we have, he sways his head from side to side with movements like a snake. So here the writer has compared the movement of the cat's head to the movements of a snake, how a snake crawls. So that's the comparison made, and we've used the word like here. So this is an example of a simile. The next we have is metaphor. Now this is quite similar to simile, but there's a slight difference. Let's see what it is. When two not so similar things are compared to each other without using the words like or as. Now here also comparison is made between two things which is seemingly not so similar, but we do not use the words like or as. These words are used in simile, but in metaphor we do not use these words. For example, this stanza is from the poem The Tiger in the Zoo, and the stanza says, he stalks in his vivid stripes the few steps of his cage on pads of velvet quiet in his quiet rage. Now here the pads of the tiger are compared to velvet. Velvet is a soft cloth, soft fabric. So the pads under the foot of a tiger is compared to velvet. So this comparison is made, but there is no use of the words like and as. So this is an example of metaphor. Now let's look at this line. For he is a fiend in feline shape, a monster of depravity. Now here the cat, the Macavity, the Mystery Cat has been compared to a fiend, a devil. So here also there is no use of the words like or as. He simply said that he is a devil. So the comparison has been made, and again no use of like or as has been no, these words have not been used, like or as. So this is also an example of metaphor. Our next poetic device is repetition. When a word or phrase is repeatedly used in a poem to create an effect or to emphasize a point, it is called repetition. Now, sometimes the writers, they deliberately repeat words or certain phrases to place emphasis on those things or ideas. So this allows the readers to know that words or phrases that are being repeated are central to the theme or the meaning of the text, and so they need to be paid more attention to. For example, if you see in this poem, The Lake Isle of Innisfree, the first line is, "I will arise and go now and go to Innisfree." Now this phrase, I will arise and go now, this has been again repeated in the last stanza. Again, the first line is, "I will arise and go now." So this is the repetition of the phrase, "I will arise and go now," which means that the writer wants to lay emphasis that how much he wants to go to this place called Innisfree. So as a reader, we also know that the main point in this poem is that the writer wants to show that he so wants to go to this place. Okay, our next poetic device is anaphora. Now this is also a little bit similar to the device that we just did, repetition. Let's see how is it different from it. The repetition of a word or phrase at the beginning of successive clauses or sentences. Now in repetition, there could be repetition of any word, and these words could be placed anywhere in the text, in the poems. But in anaphora, the repetition has to be of the word or a phrase at the beginning of successive clauses in a sentence. Now look at this example. This is from the Ball poem, this stanza. "What is the boy now who has lost his ball? What is he to do?" Now if you see here in the beginning, the poet has used the word what, and again in next line we've used what. So in these two successive clauses, the poet has used the same word what. The repetition has been done of this word. Now if you look at this line, "merrily bouncing down the street," and then "merrily over." Again, the word merrily has been repeated, and it has been repeated in the beginning of two successive sentences. So this is called anaphora. While in repetition, this device that we call repetition, there the words could have been repeated anywhere, the words or phrases. For example, if you saw the example that we just did in The Lake Isle of Innisfree, the sentence "I will arise and go now" was first used in the first stanza, first line, and then again it was repeated in the last stanza, first line. So that's the difference between repetition and anaphora. Now next we have alliteration, the occurrence of the same letter or sound at the beginning of words written close together. Now when the words that are placed close together, they begin with the same sound, we call it alliteration. Now you must be familiar with the tongue twister. "She sells seashells by the seashore, but the seashells that she sells are not the seashells of that seashore." Now you see the repetition of the sounds sir and sure. Now the words, these are written closely together and they have the same beginning sound. So this is an example of alliteration. Now I have also taken up consonants and assonants here only with alliteration because these are closely related to alliteration. In fact, we can call them subsets of alliteration, parts of alliteration. Now in consonants, there is a repetition of consonant sounds in quick succession, while in assonance, there is a repetition of vowel sounds in quick succession. The only difference is that in alliteration, usually the occurrence of the sound is at the beginning of the words, while in consonant and in assonance, this is not the case. The sounds could be repeatedly used in succession, either at the beginning or in the middle, or it could also be at the end of the words. So the sounds could be repeated anywhere in the word. Now let's take an example. If you see this first sentence, "and no one buys a ball back," you see there's a repetition of the sound b. Now these words that are closely placed, buys, ball and back, these three of them, they begin with the same sound b. So this is the repetition of consonant sound b. Next we have, "I hear the lake water lapping with low sounds." Now here the repetition is of l sound. "Bearing his white fangs, his claws." Now you see here, the consonant sound was placed at the beginning of words that were placed closely together. But in this case, we have the repetition of sir sound, but here it's not at the beginning of the words, but at the end. If you see, bearing his white fangs, his claws. So the sir sound is, it comes at the end of the words. So this is also an example of consonants. Now let's see the example of assonance. What is the boy now who has lost his ball? Here the vowel sound or is repeatedly used in the words here. Next we have, he stalks in his vivid stripes. So the vowel I, that the sound is E. So this sound has been repeatedly used in the words which are placed close together. We say, he stalks in his vivid stripes. So this vowel has been repeatedly used, this vowel sound. Okay, next we have imagery. The use of figurative language to represent objects, actions and ideas in such a way that it appeals to our physical senses. It creates visual representation of ideas in our minds. Now sometimes the writer uses such beautiful language that we can actually imagine whatever he says in our minds. We have a clear picture of what the writer says in our minds. For example, if we read this stanza from the Ball poem, I saw it go merrily bouncing down the street and then merrily over, there it is in the water. Now when the poet, he describes the ball going merrily bouncing, we can actually imagine that the ball must be going happily, like a child bounces when he walks joyfully. The way he walks, that's how the ball must be bouncing, and that's how it went into the water. Again, in the next line, we have the image of the linnet's wings. The evenings full of linnet's wings. So we can actually imagine the evenings when the birds must be flying together and the sky must be full of linnets. So we have a clear picture. So this is an example of imagery. Next device that we'll talk about is onomatopoeia. Now this is when the words that imitate or resemble the sound that it describes, these are called onomatopoeias. For example, meow, hiss, buzz. Now these words, they imitate or they resemble the sound that they represent. So this is an example of onomatopoeia. For example, in the poem, The Rain on the Roof, the poet says, and to listen to the patter of the soft rain overhead. The word patter, it also describes, this word describes the sound that it refers to. When the rain falls on the tin roof, the sound that it creates, the patter sound. So this sound word represents the sound that it creates. Next we have every tinkle on the shingles. Again, tinkle is an example of onomatopoeia. Next poetic device is personification. Treating a non-living thing as a living being. So this means personification. When in a text, the writer talks about a thing, a non-living thing, as a living thing, as a person, we call the device as personification. For example, from this poem, we've taken this line, the Lake Isle of Innisfree, dropping from the vales of the morning to where the cricket sings. When the poet says that peace comes dropping from the vales of the morning. Now the veil is a piece of cloth that women wear to cover their faces. And the writer here says that veil of the morning. So morning has been personified as if morning is a person, as if morning is a woman who wears a veil. So this is an example of personification. Now next, in the Ball poem, when the poet says, I saw it go merrily bouncing down the street and then merrily over, there it is in the water. Now here the ball has been personified. It has been given childlike characteristics when the poet says that the ball goes as if a child goes bouncing merrily. He walks joyfully. That's how the ball goes. So the ball has been personified in this stanza. And next we have, and the melancholy darkness gently weeps in rainy tears. Now the darkness has been personified when the poet says, in the rain on the roof, the poet says that the darkness was melancholy, sad. Now who is usually sad? A person, not darkness. Darkness is a non-living thing, but darkness here has been personified. Next we have oxymoron. It is a figure of speech in which two contradictory terms appear. Now two words that are opposite to each other and they are placed together, that device is called oxymoron. For example, in this poem, The Tiger in the Zoo, the poet says, in his quiet rage. When the tiger walks in his cage, he stalks in his cage in his quiet rage. Now, rage is something when it's extreme anger. And quiet means peace, quietly, silence. But we know that when we are angry, we cannot be quiet, right? So when he says quiet rage, these two words, they are opposite, but they are placed together, right? Next, we have lively death. Now, death is the end of life, and lively is related to life. So when he says lively death, these two are opposite words, but they are placed together. Again, it's an example of oxymoron. Next, we have deafening silence. Silence is when there is no noise. And deafening is usually we say when, because of a lot of noise, too harsh a sound, too loud a noise, when our ears, they become deaf. We become hard of hearing. That's when we use this word deafening. So here the writer has written deafly silence, that the silence was so much that it deafened us. It made us hard of hearing. So this is again an example of oxymoron, this deafening silence. Next, we have act naturally. When we say act naturally, we know when we act, we are not natural. And these two words are put close together, they are put together. This is also an example of oxymoron. When we are asking a person to act, and we are also saying naturally, act naturally. How could a person be natural when he is acting, right? So all of these phrases that have words that mean completely different things, but when they come together, they create an effect. These are all examples of oxymoron. Oh, and I think I've been mispronouncing this word all this while. Let me correct myself. It's not oxymoron, but it is correctly pronounced as oxymoron. So yes, this device is used to describe complex and conflicting emotions, and oxymoron reflects a certain confusion or conflict in the mind of the writer. So this adds an element of complexity and encourages the readers to think deeply. Next, we have transferred epithet. Now, the use of an adjective with a noun when it actually refers to another noun. When an adjective is used with a noun but it does not qualify that noun, but it actually qualifies some other noun, that device is called transferred epithet. For example, in the poem The Rain on the Roof, the writer writes, "And the melancholy darkness gently weeps in rainy tears." Now the adjective melancholy means sad, and it has been used with the noun darkness. Now darkness, we know, is not a person, is not a living thing, so it cannot be sad. So we know it's the person who is actually sad, to whom darkness appears sad. So we know this melancholy adjective is not used for the darkness, but it is actually used for person. Next we have, "and 1,000 dreamy fancies into busy being start." Again, the adjective dreamy has been used by fancies. We know fancies cannot be dreamy, but the people are the ones who dream. So they can be dreamy. Again, this adjective has been used with a noun, it does not actually qualify. So we know, the reader knows in his minds where we have to transfer that adjective to. Next we have enjambment. The continuation of a sentence without a pause beyond the end of a line or stanza is called enjambment. Now let's look at the example. This stanza is from the poem The Tiger in the Zoo. The writer writes, "He stalks in his vivid stripes the few steps of his cage, on pads of velvet quiet in his quiet rage." Now we have to read the whole stanza to know the meaning, because the meaning runs over from one line to the next without being interrupted by commas or full stop. So this device, it creates a sense of speed or urgency for the reader, because it forces him to continue moving to the next line to finish reading the complete thought. So this device is known as enjambment. So this was all for today. I hope you understood the poetic devices and hope you found the video useful. If you did, please share it with others and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to watch more such videos. Thank you.